All right.
Okay, so let us make a start. We are 10 o'clock now, and good morning and welcome again, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. We are now on part 3 of our four-part series, and this is being led by the CARICOM GCF Ag Ready project in collaboration with the Caribbean Climate Responsive Agriculture Forum. My name is Michaela Gregor Karai. I am a technical specialist in soil and water with ICA. And so today we will be presenting to you some of the activities that have taken place on the GCF project. And through this platform, it is a knowledge to action platform. And what we aim to do is to raise awareness across the region. And so this forum extends to Antigua, Bahamas, Barbados. We have Belize with us, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, as well as Trinidad and Tobago. So we definitely extend, and we have the region with us to share information, to raise awareness on knowledge as it relates to climate smart agriculture practices and various issues affecting the agriculture sector. And through that, having persons from across the region, we want to build a community of interested persons that will be engaged at the regional and national level, and will take it upon themselves within groups, individuals, through projects, to implement some of the key actions to address some of the climate issues. And in addressing those issues, coordination is very important. So we want to enhance our coordination and collaboration among our stakeholders, the ministries of agriculture, various partners. But more so, we want to bring to you the information, talk to you, share all that knowledge with you. But talking is not the final part of it. We need to act. And as such, after we share the information with you, we want to now translate that knowledge to practical and effective action on the ground so that we can really address the issues that we're experiencing. We always experience drought, we experience heavy rainfalls, pest and disease incidents. And so how now can we implement action to address these issues? So this is what the platform is about. It is open to our partners, our stakeholders to utilize it to share information, share some of the initiatives that you are doing in the region to contribute to building a climate resilient agriculture sector. And so this is what the platform is about. And so I will now pass on to you, Shalini Maharaj, who is the project manager. We also have with us Shana Privo, who is providing some support, Dr. Chani St. Martin providing support also. And we have our presenter, Dr. Guven Sipasad and Dr. Roberto Valdero, who will be presenting some of the work that they have done under this project to you today. Shalini.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is our third session on the 4-part webinar series. And again, if you haven't joined us before, welcome. This is brought to you in part by the Caribbean Ag Ready project funded by the Green Climate Fund. The past 2 sessions really dedicated to greenhouse gas emissions and the role that GHG inventory has to play and the importance of that in the Caribbean, as well as on the first session, we would have given a background on the project and how that really fits into the larger scope of making the Caribbean sector and a ready, resilient sector. So in this session, we are going to focus on 2 things. We're going to look at the barriers to transformation of the Caribbean ag sector. As we all know, we know, most of us know what the current state is, and we may even know where we would like to go and what the ideal state is. But what we may not know is the barriers that prevent us from getting there. So our consultant, Dr. Govind C. Prasad, is going to walk us through some of the market barriers from a market and value chain perspective on how do we get there. Our second presenter, Roberto Valdivia, is going to walk us through a very interesting topic here. So he would have trained a lot of persons who hopefully are present here today in 9 participating countries on the trade-off and multi-dimension analysis. So he's going to walk us through, maybe not too technical, but how we can use such analysis and such tools for policy making, decision making, and how we can use it to enhance the Caribbean sector. So without further ado, we have 2 really exciting presentations. I would like to introduce Dr. Govind C. Prasad, who is our market and value chain analyst on this project. Govind, over to you.
Okay, Shalini, thanks very much. Thanks for the introduction and pleasure being here. My presentation, I would look at market barriers. And before I really start, I just want to tell you that a market is where a point at which a transaction takes place. So the market might be on the street, it might be at a wholesale market, it might be a virtual market, it might be electronic market, it might be at the wholesale retail shop, at the farm store, and even at the consumer, when the consumer buy a product. So what we did, we looked at these aspects of in the market barrier study, and I just want to highlight certain issues that came up, so that when we going forward in our climate change adaptation and all that, we would see how things that we should focus on and consider as we going along. So quickly, we look briefly on climate change and barrier analysis, what it is all about, the issue of willingness to pay, and then we would highlight some of the barriers or the issues that came up at the markets when we were doing the study. And just an introduction, very quick, farmers have dealt with climate risk throughout the entire history of agriculture. So climate change is now increasing intensity, frequency, and variety of those risks. Maybe the events were always there, or maybe frequency increasing, or is it that communication, ICT communication, allowing us to know more about it? Climate-related risk can cause major losses of revenue to the sector. I always remember the case of Grenada, where someone measured and said, well, 10 million loss in the nutmeg industry. But this is not so. The losses add up year after year after year. So a simple event could translate into $100 million loss in 10 years' time, depending on how they count for it. The livelihoods of small farmers, smallholders tend to be most at risk, and climate change also had potential to offer new opportunities for some agricultural value chain. For example, with climate change, you might get new areas that is warming up. You might get new areas that are inundated, which would mean that you could start some aquaculture farming in areas that previously you couldn't do it. So there's both sides of the table. In terms of Barry, how we framed our questions, just want to tell you that we look at this way. In terms of the consumers, we ask them if growers vegetables were grown vegetables were sustainably produced on the label. We ask the consumers, are they willing to pay more for it? And then we also ask them how much more. And other questions are like, if growers put process with low carbon footprint on the label, would you be willing to pay more for it? So these are some of the questions we asked the consumers as we were going along. And then when we spoke to the processors, we had 2 types of processors, those that the doer and the non-doer. Doer are those who adopted the climate change, and the non-doer are those who didn't adopt. And we framed our questions this way. In anticipation of drought, flood, or any of the factors you identify above, how did you change your procurement practices? How did you change your buying practices so that you would have your goods to process for those who adopted? And then for the non-doers, those who didn't adapt to climate change, we asked them, in anticipation of drought or flood or any of the other factors, what will make it easier to procure commodities? So that was the very simple, that was the approach we took when we were going ahead in the survey. And when we look at the literature and we look at what is happening out there, I came up with this. Someone said, I am seeing quite a few climate friendly products at the supermarkets. Are consumers willing to pay more for these? And how can we encourage people to make good choices? This is something we want to bear in mind, because people talking climate change, climate friendly, and people are jumping on the label to probably get a higher return for the goods. Now, so our focus would be on the demand side, the buying side. When we talk market and value chain, the processors are part of the market. They are the ones who buy. The marketers would be the intermediaries, those who the middlemen and that kind of thing, and also the consumers who buy to consume. So we'd focus on that side. And when I was doing this research, also I was looking at to see what is happening out there in the world. And what I was saying is that farmers and other value chain actors face many challenges in the value chain, in the marketing of vegetables. For example, when there's a climatic event, um, remember the public servants, the extension officers are those who doing their normal duties. And when you have an event like a flood or a hurricane or something like that, it serves to aggravate the shortages in manpower that we have in the in these ministries. What we also find is that farmers are not able to react to changes in the market conditions. When you have an event, maybe drought, maybe um, flood, maybe hurricane, farmers are not able to react because it calls for immediate action. We also see that processors may not be able to access supply volumes required for economies of scale. They might have to pay higher amount of crop damage, fields flooded out, and that kind of thing. We also see that consumers may not understand the challenges brought about by climate change and carbon dioxide emissions, and even to change their consumption behavior and their personal preferences. Um, what we also found in happening out there is that shoppers who once selected grocery products based simply on price and brand, now the attributes, they're looking at attributes such as climate friendly and eco-friendly as part of their consideration. So supermarkets and groceries, they're using words climate friendly, eco-friendly in their labeling. And they also found that few consumers who report positive attitudes towards eco-friendly product actually follow through with their wallets. So people, they look at climate change, they look at the climate label, they look at you do a survey, they say yes, we would buy climate friendly product, but a lot of them, their hands are a bit short and it doesn't reach their wallet when they're going to purchase things. Out there we see terms, and people use terms that this is green. They said green is the new black. And they're using eco-friendly quite a lot. But eco-friendly, we need to differentiate it from climate change. Eco-friendly would, would would be practices that do not harm the earth environment, while climate friendly defines products that reduce damage specifically to the climate. So when we're going ahead and we want to do marketing initiatives and that kind of thing, we want to differentiate between eco-friendly and climate friendly. Um, some brands are even moving beyond simply eco-friendly and they now seek to claim their products are climate neutral. So we as economists, we look for these things. There's also, we should know by growing up, there's the term whitewashing. And now there's the term greenwashing, where everybody talking about green and being green. And there are agencies coming up that certify your products as being green. For example, climate neutral and global eco labeling network. So they would give you that stamp of approval too, where you would see it in supermarkets. Um, in terms of that willingness to pay, you also did some studies out there, and they found that 73% of consumers would change their consumption habits to reduce their impact on the environment, and almost half would switch to environmentally friendly product. So climate friendly, environmentally friendly. As economists, we see this as in the same category as geographic indication, where people willing to pay more. People are willing to pay more because they're concerned about the environment, and they're also concerned about farmers. So it's something that you could factor in. You could label your products when you're going out there as climate friendly or environment friendly, to get higher prices as you go along. Um, they also said that actions then are controlled by intentions, but not all intentions are carried out. Consumer concern about the environment does not readily translate into the purchases of environmentally friendly product. A lot of consumers, they concern about the environment, they talk about the environment. Tesla, a lot of people drive in Tesla cars because they're concerned about the environment. But while people are concerned about the environment, sometimes, many times they cannot or they do not purchase environmentally friendly products. Um, they also said that using brands can nudge consumers towards more eco-friendly product. So as we're going ahead, this is the climate change era. We need to ride on that momentum and create brands that that relate to climate change, so that we could get better prices for our products. So how Caribbean market players responded to climate change? We had the doers and we had the non-doers, the processors, and they adapted through contracting growers to supply them with key inputs for their operation. And they contacted importers as well to make sure that they diversify their supply base. So the contract growers, they diversify the supply base by contacting importers to make sure they get the goods. The non-doers, those who didn't take on climate change, as we say in the Caribbean, what they said was that having stable or lower prices was important to them for the operation, and diversification of storage, larger storage volumes, like the mango processors and the pepper processors would buy more tanks to store more, so that they would if need be, that's the direction they would go. um, and they were saying, we should try to get higher volumes on the market. The consumers, we also looked at the consumers, and 83% of the consumers indicate that they were aware of climate change, and they were willing to pay more for goods produced under climate friendly practices. Um, so we we look forward in terms of developing some recommendations to how could we, what they recommended. They recommend development of strong governance organization linking producers and actors to the market. So what intervention could we do at the market level? Strong governance organization, farmers organization linking your producers to the and other actors to the market. Food services, having a database of restaurant um, buyers and all that to facilitate easy takeoff of the goods. Um, Utilize a value system of consumers to get better prices. We know that the consumers were willing to pay more. So we want to use that to get better prices for our farmers. Um, the livestock people, the abattoir is part of your market system for the livestock people. And they wanted easier access to good abattoirs. They recommended contract farming systems and strong farmers organization. The non-doers in the livestock sector, they wanted easy access to cold storage facilities. So the public or private sector could invest in cold storage facilities. So if you have that disaster or whatever come up, they would be able to store their products. We know quite well during the dry season, tomato prices go down to next to nothing in Trinidad. If there's cold storage facilities, maybe people could store their products and move it over to when prices are better. Those who didn't adapt to climate change also asked for easy access to good abattoirs, strong farmers organization, and strong seller-buyer relationship and contract farming. There's also initiatives that they recommend. Um, we also looked at drought, aggregation and transport practices, and how people adopted at the transport level. They use more ventilated bags and boxes so that you don't have that build up in heat. We know quite well as you move across, when we see people come into the market or leaving the market, they use tarpaulin to secure their goods. But under that, tarpaulin could easily reach 200 degrees, 300 degrees in hot sun. So although you might be using ventilated bags and boxes too, the other practices in transportation, we have to look at that in the transportation system.
Okay, good. And
Um,
just before you continue, some persons wanted a bit of clarity as to who are the consumers you polled. Thanks.
okay, the consumers we polled were the buyers who buy um, food products or vegetables to to carry it home and consume. So that at that level, so we did the processors who are buyers, so they would buy and process. We polled the transport providers, the aggregators, the middle people, because you have in different countries, people go to the farm and buy, collect, and then carry to the market. And then the next level would be your consumers, those would be who would consume.
This would be the project countries, right? The
Yeah,
9 project countries.
yeah,
Okay.
in the 9 project countries. We didn't look at the differences between one country and the next, but we looked at, in totality, how people related in the 9 countries. In the case of drought, as it relate to marketing and transport too, persons were saying, your farmers were saying they want to sell their crop in advance. They were looking at direct delivery to buyers, and also farm gate sales as strategy to deal with drought. Um, Information system, um, farmers were concerned about in different countries, you have different level of market intelligence, market information. So a key um, piece of technology to deal with drought is having information out there in terms of the market, what kind of prices prevailing, what prevailed last year and all that. Weather news and early warning systems were key in terms of information systems. Um, in this slide, for example, you would see where we plot prices for cabbage, prices and volume in the dry season and the wet season. And just as a quick example, you would see where when the volume is high, the price is low. When the price is high, the volume low. So we could know that in the dry season or in the wet season, what kind of prices they expect. And this is a typical market information chart. Also, this is one for tomato that we do. And countries need to produce that kind of information so that farmers could decide what to plant, when to plant, and what kind of prices they might be able to get, or if to shift from one crop to the other. In terms of the processors, an estimated 62% of processors said they didn't do anything to reduce the impact of climate change. So we really see that the processing sector, I don't know if it's because they depend on importation more, so they didn't react, but just 38% acted because of climate change issues. So that is something that we need to deal with, working with that set of the cadre of processors we have in all the countries to get them prepared for climate change. Um, Climate change factors that impacted on food processors, the most important was drought, and then the higher temperature, and then your unpredictable rainfall, then floods. So drought is the one that had a major impact. And I was talking before that, drought will be here. Water, we need to focus on water because you cannot create more water. So we have to find ways of saving water and using it wisely. Um, so the processors, the contracted growers, as I indicated earlier, they link the importers to diversify the supply base. That is how those who acted, this is how they they, they acted. Those who didn't react, the processors, they were asking for stable prices and higher volumes in the different products. Um, Consumers, how consumers responded to climate change. A total of 62% of consumers indicated a willingness to contribute money to restore the farm if a grower lost his or her crop. So consumers are really concerned, and farmers need to know this. And during times of disaster, um, use the concern, use the labels to recover your money and get better prices. Um, they also indicated an estimated 66% indicated that they choose tomato grown and packaged using climate friendly practices, while 34% chose traditionally grown and packaged tomato. So when people know that you use climate friendly practices, they're willing to pay more. They're concerned about it and they're willing to pay more. And they also indicated, what percent and how much more they were willing to pay. And we used tomato as a sample to see how much more money they were willing to pay for the different products. They also said that they're willing to pay more for those farmers who install irrigation systems, and this is good news. If the consumers are aware of this, you install irrigation system, they know your cost would go up, and they're willing to pay more. So you could ride on this initiative to get better prices. They're also willing to pay more when climate negatively affect their farm. 67% said yes, they're willing to pay more. So, pulling it together in summary, we have found limited climate change preparedness among your processors. So your intervention program should be developed to address the shortcoming. Producers can make greater use of market information and intelligence. Um, Countries should be encouraged to generate real-time and historical market information reports and send it out to the respective producer groups. Send it out in a form that they could use it. Maybe they still need newsletters. We find it expensive, or it take too much time, but maybe that is where we still need to go. When market intelligence is taken into account together with climate data, this can inform producers on what combination of crop and livestock to invest. We also found that consumers indicate an understanding and appreciation for climate change. So we could use this in our branding initiatives, in our labeling and advertising to exploit this appreciation. And given that consumers are willing to pay higher prices, this can serve as an incentive to producers to invest in climate smart technology as an additional cost, as the additional cost can be recovered. So with that, I over to you, Chairperson. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Gwen. Um, for persons who have questions, we want to go into Roberto's presentation, and after that, we will take all questions. So in the meantime, feel free to start putting your questions in the chat. And also towards the end, you could raise your hand, use the raise hand function, and you can open your mic and ask any question or share any of your experiences or comments. Okay, thank you. Roberto, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you please confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, full screen.
Okay.
All good.
Great. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to make this presentation. The goal of this presentation has two parts. The first part is to make the point that why modeling is important to assess the impacts of climate change, adaptation, and mitigation on the agricultural sector. And the second part is a brief summary of some of the results on a case study, a pilot study that we did within the GCF Readiness Project in the Caribbean. So let me go. So I want to start with what Kelly Witkowski mentioned on the first webinar a couple weeks ago, the challenges for the agricultural sector, right? Providing healthy food for growing populations, increasing production, adapting to climate change, mitigate emissions, and maintain and improve livelihoods. And while at the same time, trying to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and meet the commitments that the countries have, like, for example, the Paris Agreement, right? So, of course, one of the great risks that we have right now is climate change. And so this figure is, if you see the date, is from yesterday. This is the temperature anomaly at 2 meters above surface. This is from yesterday, and you can see around the world, except the Antarctic, the temperatures are greater than the historical average. Look at the Arctic, 3.5, 55 Celsius, higher than the historical article. So we know this is a problem, and this is a threat to agriculture and the food systems, right? So talking about food systems is much more than supply and demand, right? It's a very complex system that involves local to global scales.
You want to go now, Patrice?
Sorry. Oh, I think somebody is talking. That involves a lot of potentially volatile and vulnerable points, right? And very difficult to predict future conditions because of all these interactions. And it's also difficult to assess the impacts of shocks like climate change or for example, COVID that we had, right? And the responses, the resilience of the system. So we need to represent complexities via models or scenarios to be able to assess what are the likely impacts or responses to the different shocks. Adaptations can be built to have a more resilient system, but we need the tools to assess the impacts of those adaptations. I don't know if you're aware, but 2 days ago, the IPCC released the AR6 synthesis report. And I really like this figure because it shows that the choices and actions that we made can shift the pathways either to a more sustainable world or a more degraded world, right? So to me, the way I see this is, for example, if we have a policy intervention or a technology intervention, right? And the outcomes or the results from those new technologies or adaptive technologies or policies will show us in which pathway we are. But how do we not know that? I mean, policymakers need to know in order to invest, they need to know what are the potential consequences of those interventions or technologies. That's where we need the models, right? So we need to make ex ante type of analysis to be able to see if we are moving on the right pathway or if we are moving towards a more degraded world on a different pathway. And more than that, we also, for example, if there is a shock like a drought or a hurricane or any other extreme event, we need to know whether the system is already resilient and we can continue on the same pathway, or the system will collapse and then will move downwards to the path that we don't want, right? So I think this figure that they presented in this synthesis report tells a lot of the needs for modeling tools that can be used for policy decision making and interventions. So just a brief word about the methods that have been used for climate change impact and adaptation and some of the limitations. Most of them use average or aggregate data. The concept of representative farm failed to represent the heterogeneity and technological detail that is essential to analysis of adaptation, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that the analysis of impacts of future climate is usually done with current socioeconomic systems or technology. So many studies project impacts at 2050 or even to the end of the century, but maintaining the current conditions, current socioeconomic conditions, institutions, and biophysical conditions. So there is a mismatch there. And then the other issue is that there is limited measures of economic impact, right? For example, the lack of distributional impacts. Most of the studies focus on mean or average results. And the main issue is because there is a high degree of biophysical and socioeconomic heterogeneity that plays a key role when we assess the impacts of climate change, vulnerability, and adaptation in agricultural systems. So just to put into concept, why is this important? Let's look first at the farm, okay? So the farmer has a household, livestock, agriculture, and manure, fertilizer, all the inputs that they use, and so on, right? And farmers expect to gain from these activities, could have the food security and also support their livelihoods, okay? So any change or disruption to this farming system or the interactions between these will have an impact, either positive or negative, on farmers' livelihoods and possibly beyond the farm, environmental impacts, for example, right? So new technologies like a new crop variety, the change in farming system or changing the components of farming system, environmental changes like climate change, or policy interventions like conservation programs, subsidies, or shocks like COVID, for example. All of them will have positive or negative impacts on the farmers. But now let's, for example, talk about the case of a proposed new technology, right? So farmers have the current technology and there's a new technology, let's say a new crop variety, right? So farmers face the question of whether to adopt or not to adopt. So it's a choice question. And there could be multiple factors that will influence adoption, right? Some barriers, some social, cultural, environmental. But at the end, farmers will look at what are the expected gains, right? If I'm going to be better off with the new technology. There could be some tools to assess what are the potential benefits of the new technology, cost-benefit analysis, or could try to adopt it. It doesn't work, maybe go back to the system. But not always is feasible to do this kind of test, right? What if the proposed new system, for example, involves alternatives that have many components changing, like land configuration, new crops, and other things? Or when we look at adaptation strategies to climate change, looking into the future, right? So how do we deal with these multiple scenarios? And now it gets more complicated when we look at the regional or landscape level, right? So we have multiple farms, and not everybody manage their farm in the same way, and not everybody have the same income from agriculture, and not everybody grows the same crops. So what we really have is a distribution of outcomes in a region, right? So we have distribution of farm net returns, poverty rates, emissions, different soil quality. So systems are being used in heterogeneous populations that result in distributions of gains and losses. For some may be better off than others, right? So given this complexity, how to assess the impacts of changes in the farming system? So one approach is to assess the trade-offs and synergies, and also looking at a whole farm system approach, not just one commodity. So one of the tools that we use is the trade-off analysis for multidimensional impact assessment, the TUMD model. This is a unique simulation tool for multidimensional impact assessment that uses a statistical description of a heterogeneous farm population to be able to simulate the adoption and impacts of a new technology or a change in environmental conditions and of policy interventions, for example, payments for ecosystem services, and is designed to provide information for policy decision makers. The way it works is to simulate experiments for a population of farms using, for example, the base production system, like the current technology that farmers have, an alternative system, what we call system 2. So the model is designed to utilize available data to be able to be more accurate, and then can be used for ex post or ex ante analysis. And it's an alternative to econometric models that require large panel data sets and more complex, right? And the other advantage is that we can assess sensitivity to key parameters to assess what data we need. So I just wanted to transit to the logical structure of the model, but focusing on the process of adoption analysis. And why it's important? Because again, when there's a new technology, and many studies, what they do is, let's say, okay, with the current technology, let's say farmers gain or their farm income is $100. And then with the new technology, they said it's $120. Then the second technology is better off, and that's fine. But the problem is doing that kind of assessment implies that everybody would switch to the second technology, right? And that's not true. That we know that not all the farmers adopt the proposed technologies or interventions. So when we have, let's say, a population of farms, right, in a region, we can estimate technology with indicators like poverty, sustainability, food security, nutrition for that population of farms. When a new technology, like a new crop variety, is available, then there is a process of adoption. And some farmers will adopt and some farmers will not adopt. But the consequence of this adoption process is that we end up with two subpopulations, right? The non-adopters and the adopters, and each one will have their own indicators. And when we put them together for the whole population, the indicators are different. And this is completely different than assuming that everybody will switch to the new technology, right? Because the heterogeneity that I just mentioned before, and then, of course, this also has some challenges, like we need to find out what would be the new, for example, if this is a new crop variety, what would be the new crop yields if farmers would adopt this technology. So this is in the case of adoption, but now let's bring the same concept for climate change. We have the same population of farms, right? Now, what happens if climate change comes? In this case, farmers cannot choose whether they adopt climate change or not, right? In this case, everybody is impacted. However, not everybody is impacted the same way. In fact, our studies and what we've seen is that some farmers may gain from climate change and some may lose from climate change. So we will have two subpopulations, the gainers and losers, right? And this is important, and just keep in mind that concept, that there are some that gain and some that lose from climate change. So again, we have two subpopulations, and we need to be able to identify what are the consequences of climate change for those two subpopulations. And then the third step was, okay, so we have climate change. Let's talk about adaptation, introducing an adaptation technology. And then this process is the same as the adoption, right? So there's a new technology and farmers would adapt, meaning some of them will adapt and some will not. Again, we have another set of subpopulations, the non-adopters and adopters. So I know you can see the importance of disaggregating this kind of analysis to be able to design strategies like mitigation or adaptation strategies that can fit what happens in these regions or in this population of farms. So the agricultural model intercomparison and improvement project created like 12 years ago has been working to address these critical limitations of climate impact and assessment models. By the way, this picture is in Costa Rica at ICA. In 2018, we had the ACMIP's Global Workshop, the number 7. We partnered with ICA for that workshop. So the mission of ACMIP is to provide science-based agricultural decision-making models and assessments of climate variability and change and sustainable farming systems to achieve local to global food security. I'm not going to go into the details here, but it's basically based on the premise of 3 pillars: pathways to sustainable farming systems, coordinated global and regional agricultural assessments, and the generation of knowledge products, improved models and data. In ACMIP, we have developed what we call the regional integrated assessment that links climate, crop, livestock economics and models and data to evaluate the impacts of climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. We've been working in many countries in Africa and South Asia, with the goal of developing these protocols and linking these models. It's a whole farm system approach, transdisciplinary. It's a multi-scale from field, farm, region, and global. It includes multiple climate and crop models, and one of the key characteristics is these distributional impacts. So we can assess, for example, impacts on poverty rates, food security on a population of farms. Now, moving quickly to what we did in the case studies for the GCF readiness project in the Caribbean. The idea was to demonstrate how an approach like this can provide information for policy decision makers in the region. Yeah, I don't have to go in detail on this. We know that, especially for the Caribbean, and the projections is that it's going to get hotter and drier, right? But what I would like to highlight, and this is from the AR6W Workgroup 1 report of the IPCC, what I would like to highlight is what is interesting is that the small islands and the Central and South America, there are not observed or insufficient evidence about the impacts on some of the key crops, or there is low confidence on the impacts of some of them, right? So this calls for an attention. This calls for a need to do more. We need to do more to provide this kind of evidence of what is going to happen in the region with climate change. So with this activity, we also trained 12 researchers in the Caribbean, economists, on the basics of the TMD model. So they learn how to use it, what data is needed, and how to set up the model for technology adoption. And also we introduced the concept of the ACMIP regional integrated assessment. The second part was the proof of concept case study. Using existing data, we didn't do climate crop modeling. We only did economic modeling using existing data, secondary data, and existing data from the literature to assess the changes in crop yields due to climate change. The 3 cases were in Belize, the sugarcane production system, in Trinidad, tomato, pepper production systems, in Guyana, cassava. Right? So we use data from these 3 countries to implement the analysis for climate change. So I'm just going to go quickly through a few of the results. I'm not going to go into too much detail, remember what I said at the beginning, remember the concept of gainers and losers, right? The gains and losses. So one of the results that we have is what we call the net economic impact, okay? So this is for a region in Belize, for medium-sized growers of sugarcane. And this is the proportion of change of farm income, okay? So the gray bars are the gains, and the purple bars are the losses. So what this tells us is that in this population of farms, there are some farmers that gain from climate change, right? And some that lose from climate change. So of course, the magnitude of the change is greater on the losses. That's why the blue bar is the net economic impact. So it's basically the gains minus the losses, right? So the net impact is negative. But why is this important is because this shows that there is a heterogeneity, right? So there are some that gain and lose from climate change. If we would be doing a simple cost-benefit analysis, we'll probably get the blue bar, right? So, okay, so in this region, farm income will be reduced by 25%. That's it. But it ignores that in that population of farms, some of them will actually win from climate change. So we did that for different types of farms, from medium size, micro size, and small farm size in 2 regions in Belize. And you can see in some cases, the gains are much larger. And of course, also the losses are larger. But in general, the blue bars show that there is a negative impact, right? So we did the same thing for Trinidad and for Guyana. I'm not going to go into the detail, but you can see from the color bars that there's a heterogeneity. There are some that gain, some that lose. In Trinidad, we use 2 climate projections, and one of the climate projections actually have gains as a net economic impact, right? The blue bars. But what does this mean? Is that, of course, as I said before, there is heterogeneity, but then there are key implications for decision-making, adaptation and mitigation policy and investments. Now, the other point is with this approach is that we can look at trade-offs, okay? So, for example, in the x-axis, we have the net economic impact. So the blue bars that I show in the previous slides are represented here on this x-axis in the bottom. So to the right of 0, it's a positive net economic impact, so there are gains. The gains are greater than the losses. So again, if we will be doing a cost-benefit analysis, if we look at these 2 points, we say, okay, so there is an increase in farm income because of climate change, so climate change is positive. That's fine. But what this analysis doesn't tell you is that even though there are positive gains, the proportion of households that are vulnerable to climate change is quite high, between 45 to 50%. So we can estimate the vulnerability in the region in terms of the proportion of farms that may lose or are at risk of losing because of climate change, right? So we can look at this kind of trade-offs and look at the relationship between economic outcomes or greenhouse gases like methane emissions or N2O or other outcomes. Just going through the last part, then what we did is, okay, we tested some adaptation packages for tomato and pepper. What if we include drought-resistant variety? For sugarcane was a mixture of soil conservation practices, but the key part was this, including this microdosing and irrigation techniques, which requires some initial investment. And then for cassava, IPM, integrated crop and pest management. Cassava it's known for being a more resilient crop that in many cases actually benefits from climate change. But studies suggest that even though yields may increase with climate change, the increase in pests and diseases on the crop would increase. So we need to account for that. This is kind of a full figure. So I'm just gonna quickly mention the first column, the stars are the adoption rates. So the model, what it does is predict what is the potential adoption rate of this new technology. So we have this for Belize, for Guyana, and for Trinidad and Tobago, right? And the interesting thing is that we can look at and compare what if we change something like a policy support. So as I said before, in Belize, one of the key aspects of the adaptation package was, for example, the farmers need to invest on microdosing and irrigation technologies. So for the really small farmers, the adoption rates are less than 50%, between 45 and 50% in these two groups here. But if we give them a subsidy, like a 50% subsidy, then what we have is that farmers, the adoption rates from less than 40%, the adoption rates would increase to about 60 to 65%. So we can look at those kind of analysis. What would happen if we create, for example, subsidies or other types of support? The bars on the next column are the change in farm income. And to the right of zero, which all of them shows that the different adaptation strategies increase farm net returns. Some larger than others, and depending, of course, on if they're small or large farms, they have different impacts. And then the last column shows the change in poverty rates. And as you can see, all of them are negative, meaning that the adaptation strategies are reducing poverty rates. And so poverty rates can be reduced between 5% to 40% in some cases in the region. So this is the kind of results that we can provide with this analysis. So some conclusions. Climate change is likely to have negative effects on some farming systems in the Caribbean, but there are likely to be both gainers and losers, right? Because of the variation in some biophysical and socioeconomic conditions. Even in cases where there are net average gains, there might be households that are vulnerable to large losses. So an important policy challenge is to identify the most vulnerable and develop adaptation strategies to reduce that vulnerability. Climate resilient crops in the region can be used with, for example, climate smart agriculture, IPM, to adapt to climate change. But there is also the need to assess the impacts of climate change, adaptation mitigation, and their future socioeconomic conditions, what in ACME call representative agricultural pathways, which is kind of projected into the future, different scenarios. And finally, the ACME protocol-based approach facilitates collaborative analysis, research synergies, and learning across regions and countries, right? Because a protocol-based approach, we can compare with results that we do in the Caribbean with results in Africa or Asia, because all follow the same type of protocols. These models are available, but there is the need to invest on improving capacity of both scientists on the use and implementation of these methods and tools, and the stakeholders on the understanding and the use of these results. And finally, one critical aspect is we need to invest in biophysical and socioeconomic data, right? If we really want to be able to do this kind of assessments, that's a critical aspect. I am investment on data. And finally, just an advertisement, the ACME 9 Global Workshop is going to be in New York from June 26th to the 30th. Everybody's invited, and there are abstracts and sessions requests. It's due tomorrow, but I mean, we can make exceptions if somebody wants to submit abstracts to the different sections. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberto, for that comprehensive presentation. We know a lot of rich data was shared, and we tried to keep it, I know we try to keep it as brief as possible, but there's so much, naturally. So we are going to open the floor for comments and for some feedback. So remember, we had the two presentations on the barriers to the Caribbean sector. And then we had this one here by Roberto with the trade-off analysis. So please open up your microphones. Govind and Roberto are here, as well as the members of the ECA team. So please open your microphones. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, good morning and thank you for organizing this session. I would like to address my question to Mr. Govind Sipasad. You brought up a very good point, which is about the willingness to pay. And there is the wedge which has been created between the willingness to pay and the cost factor. The goal is to keep that wedge as far away from each other as possible. In other words, when the cost factor increases and the willingness to pay does not increase, then we have less revenue or less profit from that project. But that also brings in the supply management and the circular economy. How do you address, for instance, cost leaders in terms of driving down cost while keeping the price of products at the point where Caribbean people are willing to pay for agricultural projects or willingness to pay Caribbean products?
The thing is that we really have to look at your food systems and your Caribbean buyers. And you're right, it is a valid question, because when we look at food systems, we see in that people buying cheaper foods, and the cheaper foods are the high fat foods, the salty foods, and nutrient dense foods and that kind of thing. So we really need to strike a balance somewhere in terms of having access to to, affordable food. I'm not saying cheap food, but affordable food. While at the same time, farmers getting proper returns to the effort and investment. Otherwise, if they are not paid properly, they would exit the sector. And this is where we need to look at well in advance the whole issue of technology. What type of mechanization, what type of irrigation technology, what appropriate structures do we need to keep costs down and cost of production down? So there is work to be done in terms of the whole issue of mechanization, cost minimization, lowering your costs, while turning the current trajectory of a less healthy emerging population into one that you have affordable food and you're bringing down those NCDs and obesity and all that. So it is an area for further dialogue, further discussion.
Okay, and nutritious foods, one more question.
Yeah.
How do you intend to increase the nutritious value in the foods that we Caribbean people are consuming without having that done at an exorbitant price?
Yeah. I think,
go ahead, sorry.
I think the issue of nutritious food, we have nutritious food and we have quite a lot, but we don't consume it. We tend to go towards the less nutritious foods, because in Mozambique, for example, we had a scientist from there. They fortify sweet potato and they breed in more iron-rich sweet potato to deal with the iron deficiency, anemia in the population, and amongst pregnant women. So, you know, it's a larger approach. We need a multi-pronged approach, but we also need to start to re-educate our children in the schools to start to eat some of the foods that we produce in the region, which are the yams and the dashin and the fresh meats and that kind of thing, rather and move away, because the less healthy foods, the salt dense food and that kind of thing, it might be cheaper, it might be more accessible. So how do we treat with getting our healthier foods more accessible, easier reach, getting households to change what they consume? Don't know if I answered you there. Okay.
Thank you. So we have one from William Jackman and then Richard Simon. So William Jackman, you can open up your microphone. Okay. If not,
Hi, good morning. Good morning.
good morning. I can hear you
Good
now.
morning. I'm Willen Jackman from Jackman Farms. Thanks for having me in this meeting. It's just I don't know who it's going to be related to. However, a small farmer. I'm a small farmer in Trinidad and Tobago. Concerning what the gentleman just asked there, concerning the price and how are we going to keep the prices down and make it affordable for the consumers? The biggest aspect that farmers are facing with this entire thing after global warming and what have you is the price of organic fertilizers per se. There's no subsidy on fertilizers, and it's a very high. It has very high prices on them. The markup is very, very high. What I'm thinking is that probably the agricultural sector get something where that all agricultural items be monitored very closely when coming into the countries that they're going to, and that you can only put a certain amount of markup on these items, because to manage a farm with the prices of fertilizers is going up every day, and facing the high drought. I have a very good irrigation system, but when it comes to fertilizers is actually killing your pockets, and the prices of food within the dry season is very low. It's very low right now. So it's just like you're just rolling over and just waiting and saying, well, in your mind, let the rain fall, which we don't want to say, let the rain fall, because there's other people will be losing their crops within that, But that's my question. How are we going to mitigate these things that the farmers will be able to get this stuff at a cheaper price, where we can put our vegetables and fruits on the shelf at a cheaper price? The markup is like 200% or 300% from these bigger commercial giants. And we're like you said, like the I forgot the guy's name, like he said in Belize, it's like the small farms can't really produce because the weight is on their shoulders. Then we have irrigation. Water is another key thing. I mean, yes, there's subsidies for water, but the prices that a small farmer have to put out for digging a well for safer water and better water to eliminate and to mitigate the diseases and the waterborne diseases from a pond is $1,500 a foot. And if you have to go down 20 feet or 40 feet, a small farmer cannot really, pay for this thing up front and then get back a subsidy. Can the governments or can agriculture get together and get this thing dug for the farmers and get water and electricity for the farmers, and have the farmers do at least pay back something every month or something to that extent? That's my input. Hello?
Willen, thanks very much. I think you're knocking on a number of things. And key to it is that high price of fertilizer. And what we found is that fertilizer prices started to rise basically a year ago, substantially. And we didn't tie in the impact of wars on on the region and the impact of a war on food and food prices and nutrition. When that war in Ukraine broke out, fertilizer prices practically doubled and tripled. And that is something that, very little impact, very little we could do about it. The other thing is that we have been seeing depreciation of the dollar and some devaluation of the dollar in this country. So you're forced to buy things using your credit card. There's a surcharge on it, so people pass on that coming down, and then that depreciation, your buying power and fuel prices and all that. So all these impacting on producers, transporting your goods to the market today is a major cost. You have to decide whether you're even recovering your transport costs. So it's becoming more and more complex and more challenges as we going along.
But yeah.
Just to follow up on what Govin just said, yeah. So I think that the goal is to see how for example, smallholder farmers can be supported, right? Especially when there are these market distortions or shocks, like what has caused the Ukraine war on fertilizer prices, for example, right? And that's kind of what I said on my presentation on following those pathways. If there is a shock or something that disturbs the market and prices, then we need to be able to have the tools to assess what are the consequences of that and what options we have. So we need to inform stakeholders, decision makers about options and consequences. But that's one thing. But to do that, we need to be able to understand how are the dynamics at the farm and regional level, right? So that can inform decision makers about how these systems can react to those shocks.
Thank you very much, Govin and Roberto, for answering that question and providing some clarity. I think Richard Simon.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me on. It's a very enlightening conversation. My name is Richard Simon from Adult and Teen Challenge Grenada. We run agricultural farm as well as a marine farm for sea moss production. So I want to ask about the issues related to the cost of energy. So for small farmers who are interested in running irrigation systems that may be powered by the national grid, that's a significant cost. In small countries like Grenada, to run on the grid is significantly expensive. But additionally, there's maybe an even greater level of expense when it comes to running irrigation systems on solar technology or any other kind of technology for that matter. The input costs are quite high. So I'm trying to figure out whether there should not be a discussion in the same way we're looking at the whole agricultural sector as a major driver for food production and economic change in the region, that there should not be a similar discussion on the issues related to energy and how the agricultural sector in particular can benefit from a harmonized energy relationship across the region, whether or not, in fact, we should not actually have a two-pronged approach to that allows us to harness the effects of whether it's sun or water or wind to benefit the agricultural sector in the same way that we're talking about looking at approaches that will affect us on the agricultural front. That's my question.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's when I presented that slide on the expanded food systems, right? You could see the interactions not just on the agricultural sector but other sectors, including energy, right? The industry and policy and all of that. So yeah, I agree. This is a complex situation, and I think yes, agriculture can benefit also from other sectors like such as an energy. To see and the example that you gave is on the point, right? How to reduce the cost of irrigation technologies, for example, right? The energy cost. So yeah, I agree. I think there needs to be this nexus between agriculture and the other sectors.
Just to add 2 cents worth, Richard. I always see energy as a very efficient way of taxing the population. Nobody knows the actual cost of energy, and you go across the OECS, and the energy cost is extremely high. So while there's a call for cheap food, there's also a taxation on agriculture with that high energy costs and that kind of thing. So we really have to look, as Roberto said, other strategies. Could we really tap into wind and solar until they find a way of taxing us on using the sun and the wind also? So we have to be ahead of the game. Yeah. Shalini?
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Simon. I hope that answered your question. Before we go on to Renee, there is a question on the chat. How likely are we to create a regional green label for foods and produce?
I think it's something that we should look at and start the dialogue. We may not have a uniform, each country may want their own green label, or each business may want their green label also. But I think it's time to start the dialogue, because with the survey that we did, we see that people are willing to pay for green. Look at the case of Tesla cars, for example. Is not a very high valued car, but people are paying double the price because they really value saving the environment. So we need to look at that whole issue of how much people are willing to pay, and jump on the bandwagon with the green labeling. Because when you go to the supermarkets, the higher end supermarket, the prices are double and triple what you had at the wholesale level. And the more affluent people shop at these locations, and they might be the ones who are willing to pay for that green label. So we need to look at where we put in, where we using the label, and how to exploit it as much as possible.
Thank you, Govind. Renee, I don't want to mispronounce. Forgive
Yes,
me.
yes. As scientists, we are making good progressions. We are making good progressions. How to increase parallel interactions between scientist approaches and top policy actions. In a concrete example, how it comes that up to now, it is still challenging to trade agricultural produce within our Caribbean region. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's something that within ACME we have been also trying to find out what is the best way to link science and policy. And our experience is that when we have our research projects, like for example, we are doing research on assessing the impacts of climate change on adaptation and adaptation mitigation options. At the beginning, our first experiences were that we did our research, our fancy modeling results and all that, and then we went to policymakers, stakeholders, and present the results. We didn't find response. There was no track, and there was no connection with them. So they say, okay, this is fine, good, but there was no really connection, and that didn't translate into action, right? So what we did then is, instead of waiting to the end to show the results to stakeholders and decision makers, we decided to work with them from the beginning. So from the beginning, they were part of the research process. We worked with them to develop what we call adaptation packages, for example, right? So looking at the context and specific locations, and looking at what is the priorities for the government, for the local or the regional institutions and farmers, and that got more interest. And that is, I think, the way that we were able to bridge that gap between science, policy, and in this case, climate action. So that's part of the experience that we have. But of course, there's still more to do in that respect.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much for that question. We do have one comment from the chat. I believe that going green is everyone's business, and we should not only look to place them in high-end supermarkets, but in general, all over. Healthy living is not for the rich, it's for everyone. I do agree, although the price tags seem to say differently sometimes. Any other questions? Please feel free to open up your microphones. If there are any at this point.
I saw a suggestion from a question from Teresa, speaking about agricultural research into drought-resistant crop varieties. There are some drought-resistant crop that were bred years ago, but they're sitting somewhere. For example, spinach. Spinach is a very good drought-resistant crop. And there's been quite a lot of work done on spinach at UWI, but the variety is just sitting there and it needs to be developed. The other thing is that when we talk about livestock, we talk about growing all kind of grass and exotic grasses, but sugarcane seem to come at it best in drought and in the dry season. I remember meeting a farmer in Jamaica, and he would tell me that his milk production never fall off in the dry season. Why? Because he switched from regular forage to sugarcane feeding in the dry season. So sometimes we're looking at sugarcane and there's a decline, for example, in production that is happening. But maybe some of these crops that already exist, and even in combination with livestock, we need to look at these some more to see whether we were looking through looking at things narrowly, or looking at the wider things, new uses for sugarcane, for example.
Thank you, Govind. And I think that may bring us to the end of this session. Please remember to like and follow the CCRAF. Nikili would have shared it in the chat. There are some social media platforms so that you can stay updated. And then please do feel free to share the public webinars. As you know, this is open to the public so that we can further sensitize and bring awareness. There is the post survey. So if you can just click on that link as well, maybe Nikilia can send it again here on the chat. So it's the recent message. If not, if you scroll up, you can get the post survey link on the chat. Please feel free to answer those questions. It will help us in creating the CCRAF sessions moving forward. Nikilia, I will, if you're available, I'll turn to you for the closing.
Thanks, Shalini. Thank you everyone for joining us and staying on with us till the end. For the feedback poll, you will see it broadcasted on your screen. So you simply just have to select the answers or the responses that pertains to you based on the questions asked. And if you could kindly just take about a minute to complete it for us to help us, see what is some of the next steps we need to take. And so we are heading into our final session next week, Thursday, that is March 30th. And we will be presenting on addressing climate change in the Caribbean, agriculture, and some of the possibilities for the future. And of course, it would be great to get some feedback from you there as to some of the actions we should consider going forward. And we will be having with us Dr. Chanice and Martin to present on that and how we can enhance the resilience and low emission development for our agriculture sector. We also have a Facebook page that you can get, updates on the recordings and future sessions. We also have a Twitter, if you could, share, like, and follow our page to get updates. I will also be sharing the PowerPoints and the recordings via email for persons who do not have a Facebook account or Twitter. So again, thank you, Guven, and thank you, Roberto, for your presentation today. I think it was quite enlightening, some new information, some, reviving some of the thoughts and some of the directions we need to go to build a resilient agriculture sector, and important how we can, collaborate to achieve these goals. And so thank you, everyone. And I do wish everyone a pleasant afternoon and weekend coming up. And we do look forward to seeing you at next week's session, where we will discuss actions we need to take to address a lot of the issues that we are experiencing in the region. Thank you very much, and lovely day, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye.